The rainforest had always kept its oldest secrets buried, until they began to dig. Deep in the Amazon's primordial belly, where sunlight drowned in emerald shadows and roots coiled like sleeping serpents, something stirred. Not an animal, not a storm. A presence older than the cyber trees and sharper than the jaguar's tooth, unspooling itself from the dark. It pulsed through fungal networks, whispered in the sap of strangler figs, and pooled in the bellies of stagnant rivers. The jungle had always been alive, but now, for the first time in millennia, it was awake. Scientists would later call it a biotech anomaly. Indigenous elders would name it Yana-Panga, the wound that bleeds backward. But in those early days it was just a rumor. Loggers vanishing mid-sentence, their voices harmonizing with the cicadas' drone. Birds falling silent mid-flight, feathers molting into iridescent scales. Vines that recoiled from machetes, only to slither into open wounds and stitch them shut. The earth, it seemed, had grown an immune system. Some believed it was punishment for the chainsaws, the fires, the greed. Others whispered of alien seeds dropped from dying stars. But the truth was far stranger, buried in the soil's half-remembered dreams. This was no invasion, it was a homecoming. A blueprint etched in bone and sap, older than cities, older than gods. A message sent through time not by machines, but by the desperate hands of a future that refused to die. By the time the first pod crashed into the mud, its tendrils already singing lullabies to the trees, it was too late. The jungle had tasted memory, it hungered for more. And it would rewrite the world, one screaming cell at a time. Chapter 1. Rain fell in sheets, turning the Amazon floor into a slurry of mud and rotting leaves. Thalia Vaic wiped sweat from her brow, her machete biting into a tangle of lianas blocking the team's path. Behind her, Ren Sorrel muttered curses under his breath, his boots suctioning loudly with each step. "This is a waste of time," he said, swatting a blood-drunk mosquito off his neck. "Satellite images showed clear-cut zones here, not this green hell." Thalia didn't look back. She'd heard the same complaints since they'd left the logging camp at dawn. Ren, the company's newly assigned sustainability consultant, had made it clear he'd rather be sipping cold beer in Manaus than babysitting a survey team. "The storm rerouted the river," she said, hacking through a thorn-studded palm. "New growth follows water. We are close." "Bullshit, we are lost." A sharp cry cut through the rain. Thalia turned to see Ludo, their guide, crouched beside a moss-caked tree. The old man pressed his palm to the bark, his fingers tracing a gash in the wood, a clean vertical split that glistened with sap the color of engine oil. "Yana-Panga," he whispered. "Bad wound." Thalia knelt beside him. The tree's injury was unnatural, too precise, as if sliced by a laser. Black sap bubbled from the crack, emitting a sour metallic stench. She reached out. "Don't," Ludo grabbed her wrist. His milky left eye, clouded by decades of jungle fevers, seemed to fix on something in the distance. "This forest, it's sick. We should go back." Ren snorted. "Sick, it's the Amazon. Everything here's trying to kill you." He nudged the tree with his boot. The sap hissed where it touched his rubber sole, dissolving the tread. No one laughed. The storm worsened. Thunder rolled like mortar fire as the team trudged onward, the canopy above thrashing in the wind. Thalia checked her compass, its needle spinning lazily. Electromagnetic interference. She'd heard stories of mineral deposits scrambling gear, but never this far from the mountains. Ludo stopped again. He tilted his head, nostrils flaring. "Do you smell that?" Thalia inhaled. Beneath the petrichor and decay was something sweet, cloying like burnt caramel and rotting meat. Ren gagged. "What the fuck is that?" They followed the stench to a clearing. At its center lay a crater. Trees leaned away from the pit as if repelled by an invisible force, their roots exposed and blackened. Rainwater pooled in the depression, steaming faintly. And there, half buried in the mud, was a metallic pod the size of a small car. Its surface was pocked with barnacle-like growths, and from its seams spilled thick, ropey tendrils that pulsed like arteries. "Alien trash," Ren said, but his voice wavered. Thalia approached, her boots crunching on brittle vegetation. The pod's metal wasn't corroded, it looked eaten, digested by the organic mass sprouting from it. She pulled out her camera, snapping photos. The tendrils recoiled from the flash, retreating into the pod with a wet, slithering sound. "We need to call this in," she said. "Could be military, or a bioweapon." Ren smirked, "Or a billion-dollar R&D project some corp ditched. Salvage rights alone." "No," Ludo stood at the clearing's edge, trembling. "This is Yana-Panga, a wound that bleeds poison." He made the sign of the cross and vanished into the trees. "Superstitious old fool," Ren said. He crouched beside the pod, prodding a tendril with his knife. It stiffened, then lashed around his wrist. He screamed. Thalia lunged, machete raised, but the tendril retreated as quickly as it struck. Ren fell back, clutching his arm. Blood welled from 3 puncture wounds, the skin around them already graying. "It burned me," he gasped. "Like acid." "Let me see." Thalia tore open his sleeve. The injuries were worse than she'd thought. The punctures formed a perfect triangle, the flesh inside bubbling with tiny, seed-like nodules. She reached for her medkit. "Don't touch it," Ren jerked away. "Just bandage it. We'll deal with it at camp." Thalia hesitated. The nodules were moving, squirming under his skin. Ludo didn't return. By nightfall, Thalia's team made camp in a half-collapsed rubber tapper's hut, its wooden walls sagging under centuries of mold. Ren sat by the fire, peeling the bandage off his arm. The punctures had vanished. In their place was a smooth, keloid-like scar, its edges shimmering with a faint bioluminescence. "Told you it wasn't bad," he said, flexing his fingers. "Jungle's full of nasty bugs, probably just venom." Thalia said nothing. She'd watched him all afternoon, seen how he no longer sweated, how the mosquitoes avoided him. She uploaded the pod's photos to her satellite tablet, typing a report for her superiors. "Unknown biotech. Recommend immediate quarantine." The screen glitched, pixels twisting into fractal patterns before resetting. When she tried to send the message, the modem flatlined. "Storm's frying signals," Ren said. He stirred the fire with a stick, his eyes reflecting the flames in odd, prismatic flashes. "We'll head back at dawn, salvage what we can." Thalia pretended to sleep. At midnight, she heard rustling. Ren stood in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by moonbeams filtering through the clouds. He walked into the jungle, movements stiff, as if pulled by strings. She followed. He returned to the pod. Thalia crouched in the undergrowth, watching as Ren knelt before the crater. The tendrils surged toward him, caressing his face, threading through his hair. He didn't flinch. When he spoke, his voice was doubled, a human tongue layered with something wet and guttural. "Yes." The pod's barnacles split open, releasing a cloud of spores. They swarmed Ren, clinging to his skin, dissolving into his pores. He shuddered, muscles writhing like snakes under his shirt. Thalia clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. Then it stopped. Ren stood, brushed the dirt from his knees, and turned toward camp. Thalia froze, his eyes were fully black now, shot through with veins of emerald. At dawn, Ludo's body floated in the camp's water barrel. His skin was desiccated, his mouth stretched open in a silent scream. Vines coiled in his throat, budding with orchid-like flowers that leaked the same black sap from the wounded tree. Ren sipped coffee beside the corpse, his tone casual. "Guess he was right about the poison." Thalia stared at him. "What happened last night?" "Last night," Ren smiled, his teeth oddly sharp. "I slept like a baby." "Why?" The other loggers avoided the barrel, muttering about curses and river spirits. Thalia ordered the men to pack up. They'd carry Ludo's body back for burial, she said. File a report, abandon the survey. No one argued. They never reached the river. The jungle had changed. Overnight, the path they'd carved was choked with new growth, vines as thick as pythons, flowers that snapped at their ankles, trees oozing metallic sap. Ren led the way, humming tunelessly, his machete slicing through obstacles with unnatural precision. "We're going in circles," one logger said. His name was Taro, a father of 3 who joined the crew to pay for his daughter's surgery. "The river was here. I marked the trees." He pointed to a trunk. The carving he'd made hours earlier was gone, the bark healed over. Thalia checked her compass. The needles spun wildly. Above them, the canopy writhed, branches knitting together into a suffocating lattice. She gripped her machete. "We'll cut north, follow the sun." Ren laughed. "The sun's been behind clouds all day. Face it, boss, we're not leaving, not unless the forest lets us." Something in his tone made her turn. The team stared at her, their eyes dull and glassy. All except Taro, whose left pupil had dilated into a star-shaped void. "What did you do?" she whispered. Ren stepped closer, his breath reeking of burnt sugar. "We accepted the gift." He held up his arm. The scar had split open, revealing a tendril coiled around his bone like a parasitic worm. "You should too. It's easier if you don't fight." Thalia ran. Thalia stumbled into a gully, her clothes torn, her lungs burning. Behind her, the forest roared, not with animal cries, but with a single harmonized voice. Ren's voice, Taro's voice, Ludo's voice. "Join us," the jungle crooned. "We'll make you better." She climbed a ridge, hoping for a landmark, and froze. The pod's crater was visible from here. The tendrils had spread, dissolving trees and soil into a swirling mass of biomass. At its center, a grotesque spire pulsed like a heart, its surface studded with half-formed faces. Taro's, Ludo's. And hers. Thalia vomited. When she wiped her mouth, her spit gleamed with iridescent mucus. In her backpack, the satellite tablet buzzed. A single message flickered on the screen. Unknown sender, burn it all. Chapter 2. Thalia's boots sank into the mud as she followed Oren through the rainforest, the metallic pod's coordinates still glowing on her handheld GPS. Beside her, Ren clutched his bandaged arm, the fabric already damp with a luminous fluid that seeped from his wound. His breath came in shallow bursts, his eyes flickering with an unnatural green hue. "This is reckless," he muttered, kicking a vine out of his path. "We should have torched that thing the second it lashed out." Thalia didn't answer. She'd spent the last 3 hours arguing with Oren's council in Purasar. The village's thatched huts clustered like nervous children around the pod's crash site. The elders had refused to evacuate. Instead, they'd called the object Yasiri, a gift from the forest spirits. Oren, young and fervent, had been the first to kneel before it. Now he led them back to the clearing, his voice low and reverent as he described visions of unity, of becoming guardians rather than invaders. The pod hummed as they approached, its surface writhing with tendrils that pulsed like veins. Villagers ringed the clearing, their faces lit by the biotech's phosphorescent glow. Children crouched to touch the vines snaking across the ground, laughing as the tendrils recoiled playfully. Thalia's stomach tightened. Playful, the same tendrils had nearly ripped Ren's arm off hours earlier. "You see," Oren spread his hands, his smile wide enough to crack his sun-weathered face. "It learns, adapts, it chose us." Ren snorted. "It chose to melt my skin off. Let's see how adaptive it is when I take a machete to." A villager shouted. Thalia turned as a boy, no older than 10, darted toward the pod. His mother lunged too late. A tendril whipped out, coiled around his ankle, and yanked him into the pod's shadow. The crowd gasped, but instead of screams, the boy giggled. The tendril released him, and he scrambled up, unharmed, his legs sheathed in a translucent membrane that shimmered like oil on water. "A blessing," Oren cried. The villagers erupted into cheers. Thalia grabbed Ren's shoulder. "We need to leave, now." "And go where?" He glared at her, his infected arm twitching. "Your satellite phone's dead, Thalia. Face it, we're stuck here. Maybe the elders are right. Maybe this thing, maybe it's not all bad." She recoiled. The green in his eyes had spread, swallowing the brown. By dusk, half the village had volunteered to be blessed. Thalia watched from the edge of Purasar as Oren stripped to his waist and approached the pod, his chest painted with ochre symbols. The elders chanted, their voices merging with the drone of cicadas. She tried reasoning with them, pleading, even threatening, but the pod had already sunk its roots too deep. Literally. Vines now braided through the village's foundations, cracking clay pots and curling around hammocks. The air smelled sweet, cloying, like rotting fruit left in the sun. Ren sat beside her, peeling back his bandage. The wound had healed, but his skin had turned scaly and iridescent, like a beetle's carapace. "It doesn't hurt," he said, running a finger along the ridges. "Feels stronger." "You're changing," Thalia whispered. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. You saw that kid today. The pod's not killing us, it's improving us." She stood abruptly. "I'm going to the radio hut. There's a researcher, Dr. Saskia Von, studying anomalies in the Amazon. If anyone can make sense of this, it's her." Ren laughed bitterly. Good luck. The storms fried every circuit in a 5-mile radius. But Thalia was already walking. The radio hut stank of mildew and burnt wiring. Thalia crouched over the cracked receiver, her fingers trembling as she spliced frayed cables. Rain lashed the roof, and thunder muffled the villagers chanting. She'd stolen a sample earlier, a sliver of tendril sealed in a resin-coated vial, and now she held it up, watching its bioluminescent glow pulse in time with the storm. Click, the radio hissed to life. "Any frequency, this is Dr. Saskia Von with the Terran Biology Initiative. If you're hearing this, you've encountered a growth anomaly. Do not touch it. Do not inhale its spores. I repeat." "Doctor," Thalia pressed the transmitter to her lips. "This is Thalia Myers, lead of the Rio Negro logging survey. We've found something. It's not a plant. It's alive. It's changing people." "Static, then describe it." Thalia did, the pod, the tendrils, the mutations. Ren's arm, Oren's fanaticism. A long pause. "You're in Purasar, yes, near the Yavari River." "How did you?" "I've tracked similar pods across 9 countries. They're not extraterrestrial, Ms. Myers. They're ours. From a future timeline where humanity evolved into a collective organism to survive ecological collapse. The pods are seeds, retroactive fixes. They're trying to overwrite our present." Thalia's throat went dry. "How do I stop it?" "You can't, not without erasing humanity's future. but you can contain it. Burn everything it's touched, including the infected. The line died. Orin's scream tore through the village. Thalia sprinted back, the vial clutched in her fist. The clearing was chaos. Villagers writhed on the ground, their bodies contorting as bark-like skin erupted over their limbs. A woman clawed at her throat, fungal blooms bursting from her mouth. Children staggered, their eyes hollowed out by glowing moss. And Orin. He stood at the pod's center, his torso fused with the biotech. Tendrils sprouted from his ribs, rooting him to the ground. His face had split open, a fractal of wood and sinew, his voice a chorus of whispers. "Join us," he rasped, vines surging from his fingertips. The bloom must spread. Ren stepped forward, his arm fully transformed into a serrated claw. "You heard him, Thalia. It's the only way." She backed away, tears blurring the nightmare. The pod's core throbbed, and for a heartbeat she glimpsed something inside, a humanoid figure, ancient and terrible, its skin etched with timelines. Then the vines struck. Thalia ran. By dawn, Perasau was silent. The villagers moved as one, their mutations harmonized into a single, shambling network. Orin's roots now stretched for miles, dissolving trails and rivers into raw biomass. In the radio hut, Thalia crouched, gripping a rusted machete. Dr. Von's words looped in her mind, burn everything. Including Ren. Including herself. Outside, something scratched at the door. A voice, half Ren, half Hive, slithered through the cracks. "You don't have to die alone." Thalia looked down, a tendril curled around her ankle, gentle as a lover. Chapter 3. Thalia crouched in the radio hut, the rusted machete trembling in her grip. Outside, the village of Perasau was silent, too silent. Even the howler monkeys had gone quiet, their absence leaving a void in the air. Rain drummed the roof, but it wasn't water. Thick, syrupy droplets slid down the hut's walls, glowing faintly green where they pooled on the dirt floor. The tendril around her ankle had retreated hours ago, leaving a ring of blistered flesh that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Infected. Dr. Von's warning hissed in her mind, burn everything it's touched. Including herself. She stuffed the satellite tablet into her pack, its screen still flickering with the unknown sender's final message. The battery was nearly dead, but she'd memorized the coordinates Dr. Von had embedded in the last transmission, a research outpost 20 miles north, stocked with flamethrowers and thermite. If you make it, the biologist had written, you might save what's left. Thalia slung the pack over her shoulders and peered through a crack in the door. The village square was empty, the pod's crater now a gaping maw of pulsating biomass. The huts had been absorbed into the hive, their thatched roofs replaced by veils of glowing moss that drooped like funeral shrouds. Only the radio hut remained untouched, its walls smeared with a sticky resin that repelled the tendrils. For now. She crept outside, her boots sinking into the spongy ground. The air reeked of fermentation, like a vat of overripe fruit left to rot. Movement flickered in her periphery, shadows darting between trees, too fluid to be human. She tightened her grip on the machete and pushed toward the jungle's edge. The forest had become a cathedral of flesh. Trees bulged with tumors of fused bark and muscle, their branches fused into arches that dripped mucus onto the path. Flowers with serrated petals snapped at her as she passed, their centers lined with teeth. Thalia kept her eyes on the ground, avoiding the roots that squirmed like eels beneath the soil. Every few steps, she spotted fragments of her team's gear, a shredded boot, a rusted canteen, Ren's company-issued compass half-digested in a pool of acid. She froze at the sound of laughter. A child sat on a log ahead, her back to Thalia. She wore a tattered sundress, her hair braided with orchids. Not possible. The girl turned and Thalia stifled a scream. The child's face was a mosaic, one half human, the other a lattice of wood and lichen, her left eye replaced by a bulbous fungal growth. She held out a hand, palm upturned. A firefly emerged from her sleeve, its bioluminescence a sickly green. "You're pretty," the girl said, her voice harmonized with a deeper, guttural rasp. "Will you play with us?" Thalia backed away. "Where are your parents?" The girl giggled, the sound echoing from a dozen directions. Figures materialized between the trees, villagers, or what remained of them. A man with vines sprouting from his eye sockets. A woman whose arms had bifurcated into 4 clawed appendages. At their center stood Orin, his torso fused to a writhing column of roots that anchored him to the pod's crater. His mouth unhinged like a snake S, and when he spoke, the words vibrated in Thalia's molars. "She resists the bloom, how ungrateful." The hive surged forward. Thalia ran. Branches lashed at her face as she crashed through the undergrowth, the villagers' footsteps sinking into a single, thunderous rhythm. Her lungs burned, her infected ankle screaming with every step. She skidded into a ravine, the air thick with spores that clung to her skin like ash. Below, a river churned, or what had once been a river. The water was viscous and iridescent, its surface dotted with bulbous sacs that throbbed like hearts. A figure crouched at the water's edge. "Ren," Thalia whispered. He turned, the infection had consumed him. His right arm was a barbed tendril, his jaw unhinged to accommodate a nest of whip-like tongues. Yet his eyes, still half-human, locked onto hers, pleading. He raised his clawed hand, pointing upstream. Tha outpost, he gagged, the word tearing his throat. Black fluid dribbled down his chin. Go now. The hive's chorus swelled behind her. Ren snarled and lunged past Thalia, his mutated body slamming into the first wave of villagers. Run. She didn't look back. The research outpost was a graveyard. Dr. Von's team lay scattered around the compound, their bodies mummified in cocoons of resin. The tents had collapsed, their fabric melted into the soil. Thalia staggered to the supply shed, its door ajar. Inside, crates of explosives lay untouched, their labels still legible. Thermite, napalm, incendiary grenades. She loaded a flamethrower, her blistered fingers fumbling with the straps. The tank hissed, pressurized fuel slossling in its chamber. Outside, the jungle's cacophony had stilled. Even the insects had gone quiet. You don't have to do this. Thalia spun. Taro stood in the doorway, his body grotesquely elongated. Fungal stalks erupted from his shoulders, their caps split open to reveal eyeballs that swiveled toward her. His voice was a perfect mimic of his daughter's. Lian misses her father. Let me go home to her. Let us go home. You're not Taro, Thalia said, igniting the flamethrower's pilot light. The thing wearing Taro's face smiled. Aren't I? We kept his memories, his love, his pain. We're better now. It stepped closer, the shed's floorboards warping under its feet. Join us. You'll see your brother again, the one who drowned when you were 12. We can bring him back. Her breath hitched. Lucas, the hive couldn't know that, unless it's in my head already. The flamethrower trembled in her hands. The explosion lit the sky. Thalia stumbled into the clearing, the thermite charges detonating behind her in a chain reaction. Fire rippled through the outpost, melting steel and flesh alike. The hive's shriek was deafening, 1,000 voices wailing in unison. She ran until her legs gave out, collapsing in a glade where the trees still wept clear sap. Dawn broke, revealing the damage. The fire had stalled at the river, unable to cross the water's alien viscosity, but the hive's advance had slowed, its tendrils recoiling from the scorched earth. Thalia allowed herself a ragged laugh. We hurt it. The laugh died when she rolled up her sleeve. The infection had spread. Veins of emerald phosphorescence branched up her arm, converging at her collarbone. Her reflection in a rain puddle confirmed the worst. Her left iris now shimmered with the same fungal bioluminescence as Ren's. In the distance, the pod's spire pulsed, its rhythm matching her heartbeat. A voice, soft and maternal, whispered through the trees. You can't burn forever, Thalia. Let us ease the pain. She loaded the last incendiary grenade and headed north. The rainforest fought harder the deeper Thalia trekked. Vines lashed her ankles. Flowers spat neurotoxic pollen. Even the soil seemed to writhe as if the earth itself rejected her. By nightfall, she reached a cliff overlooking the Amazon basin. The horizon should have been a tapestry of unbroken green. Instead, she saw it, a jagged ring of bioluminescent growth, miles wide, spreading outward from Purasa. At its center, the pod's spire had grown into a gargantuan tree, its branches piercing the clouds. Humanoid shapes dangled from the limbs, cocooned in resin. Sacrifices, no offerings, willing ones. The satellite tablet buzzed in her pack. Dr. Von's final message flickered. Saskia Von, it's not just a hive, it's a new god, and it's winning. Thalia hurled the tablet into the void. As it fell, the screen glitched, revealing a face in the static, a man with bark-like skin and eyes of infinite green. Zorian. She slid the grenade's pin into her pocket and walked into the dark. Chapter 4. Thalia's infected arm itched, not the dull ache of a healing wound, but a deep, subcutaneous squirming as if beetles were tunneling through her marrow. She tightened the tourniquet above her elbow, the makeshift bandage soaked through with sweat and iridescent fluid. The grenade in her pocket felt heavier with every step, its pin digging into her thigh like a reproach. Burn it all, Dr. Von had said, but the fire at the outpost had only bought her hours, not salvation. The jungle here was different. Older, the trees towered like cathedral pillars, their trunks braided with veins of bioluminescent fungus that pulsed in time with her footsteps. She'd long abandoned the GPS, its screen now showed only static, faint humanoid shapes flickering in the noise, but the pod's spire loomed ahead, a black thorn stabbing the horizon. The hive's voice had quieted since dawn, replaced by a low, resonant hum that vibrated in her teeth. She found the river by smell first. It reeked of copper and spoiled honey. The water wasn't water anymore. It slithered over rocks in viscous, gelatinous ropes, its surface studded with bulbous growths that split open as she approached, releasing clouds of spores. Thalia crouched behind a boulder, watching the far bank. A figure knelt there, hunched over the current. Human, almost. Its back rippled with muscle-like tendrils, and when it turned, she saw its face, Dr. Saskia Von. Or something wearing her skin. "You're late," the thing said, its voice a perfect mimic. It held up a mangled satellite phone, its screen cracked but glowing. "I've been trying to reach you." Thalia didn't move. "You're not her." "Aren't I?" The figure stood, Saskia's lab coat hanging in tatters over a body that had too many joints. "The Hive assimilates everything, Thalia, memories, skills, guilt. Saskia's knowledge lives in the weave now, so does your brother, S." Her breath hitched. "Lucas." The thing smiled, sharpening its teeth. "He's here, in the Verdant. He wants to see you." Thalia's hand drifted to the flamethrower nozzle. "Bullshit, the pod can't time travel." "No, but it can remember." The figure gestured to the river. "This is the blood of the future, a preview of what we become. Look closer." Against her will, she did. The slime parted, revealing a reflection, not of the jungle, but of a city. A grotesque fusion of flesh and architecture, towers of fused bone, rivers of lymph pumping through streets. Humanoid shapes moved within, their bodies hybridized with flora and machinery, faces serene, connected by root-like neural cables. At the city's center stood the spire, grown into a titanic tree, its branches cradling a pulsating star. "This is your legacy," the Hive Saskia said. "The verdant weave. No more war, no more hunger, no more loneliness." Thalia vomited, her bile shimmered with spores. "You erased free will." "We cured it." The figure stepped into the river, its legs dissolving into the sludge. "Join us, or die as the animal you are." She fired the flamethrower. The Hive Saskia screamed, its flesh blistering, but the river surged. A wave of gelatinous filth slammed into Thalia, extinguishing the flame. She scrambled back, slipping on moss, as the thing reformed, its body now a grotesque amalgam of Saskia and Ludo and Ren. "You cannot win," it chorused. Thalia ran.
This story continues. Subscribe to our channel, like the video, and listen to the rest.